Flat Art Show, episode the second. My name is Evan Dom. This is a conversation with E.K. Weaver, a cartoonist. They are probably best known for this big comic called The Less Than Epic Adventures of TJ and Amal. They're currently working on a comic called Shot and Chaser, shot-and-chaser.com. Thank you for being here.
But yeah, I'm feeling a little bit like Urashima Taro waking up 100 years later and going like, what happened? What happened to the webcomic scene? Ah! Because, yeah, when I first started TJ and Amal, it was like, I mean, there were services, there were websites like, King Spot and Drunk Duck and all of that were kind of, I think, on their way out at that time. Although I think Smack Jeeves was still being used by a lot of artists. But at that point, most webcomic artists had their own websites. And then when I started up Shot and Chaser in 2022, 8 years after finishing TJ and Amal, yeah, it was like everyone's on Webtoon or Tapas now. Like hardly anybody has their own website. And I'm like, I would poke around, those sites. And I do have Shot and Chaser mirrored on both of those sites up to a point. But I would poke around going like, I'm not interested. I don't like this interface. I'm not interested in what's happening here. I mean, a lot of artists that I know do publish on those platforms, and I really like their work, but I still prefer to read it at their own websites. Especially given the censorship happening, which I mean, I know we're going to get into later. But yeah, I didn't like having to flag my own work as being my Shot and Chaser as being like just for adults, just because they're swearing in it. Saying like this isn't suitable for audio, this isn't suitable to be read because they're swearing. I'm like, no. So I kind of stubbornly did the stubborn old Grandpa Simpson thing and stuck with my own website yet again, and made sure to buy a memorable domain name for it. And as I joked in another interview, the interview at that online con we were talking about, I guess I just do that because I hate security and money. But and I know it really hampers my reach, but I'm such a control freak when it comes to my work. Not necessarily editorially, but in terms of being able to steer the story and not worry about mass appeal. I'm such a control freak when it comes to that I just wasn't willing to surrender. I wasn't willing to surrender that control just to have the hosting handled by someone else. So
yeah, fucking more power to you. You can tell that reading your stuff. It feels like you are operating with a large picture in your head the whole way through. It feels like, but you do. Did you say you are cross-posting Shot and Chaser on Webtoon and what have you?
Yeah, I got up to about page 64 on Webtoon, before they...
Of like about 200?
Yeah, it's 185 now, and it's probably going to top out. It's going to top out around probably 230, 250 pages. It's going to be a much shorter story than TJ and Amal. Yeah, I got up to about page 64 on Webtoon, and then Webtoon pulled some stuff with another artist that I was like, I can't in good conscience keep using this site. And I just had to step away. I posted on Tapas. I still need to catch up on that, and I think it's up to about page 120 there. But I hate the way it's formatted. Like, the Tapas doesn't let you change the formatting to go just page by page. It puts everything in one long vertical scroll. And Shot and Chaser's meant for print, so it doesn't read very well that way. And I have to resize the pages down to a little smaller than I'd like. I do post them on Comic Fury, which is actually my favorite so far. And Comic Fury is actually also cooperatively owned rather than corporate owned. So that's the one.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm not really familiar with that one.
Yeah, that's the one where, you can actually leave comments and track stats and things like that. But I just like it because I can actually upload individual pages, keep them at their original size, and people can subscribe
Yeah.
to it there rather than having to bookmark another site. I use Comic Fury for reading another really, really excellent webcomic called What Happens Next by Max Graves.
Oh yeah, it rocks.
Yeah, and that's where I first found out about Comic Fury, and then I was like, oh, okay, this is a wider service that other artists can use.
Okay, you said that thing about how a lot of what you're saying resonates because I think we're around the same age and we came up in webcomics in the same milieu. But you said that thing about being like a stubborn old person and shooting yourself in the foot vis-a-vis audience by just having a website that's on your own terms. But you are using these other platforms, so who knows if that's... I mean, it's good to have the one optimal space for the comic that you designed yourself, and I'm not going to fucking give that up either. But it does seem like you are making some concessions to the fact that huge numbers of people don't find comics that way,
Yeah.
which is, that's not too stubborn old person of a attitude.
Yeah, and like I still have, even where I left off on Webtoon, like the last page of Shot and Chaser on Webtoon has like it points the reader towards the address of my site. And same with Tapas. It's like, if you want to read this without any ads, without any corporate ownership, if you want to read it in its proper format, it's over here. Also, it's way more up to date. And I kind of try to entice readers to come to the main site by having the webcomic actually up to date there and have it several weeks behind everywhere else.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So 2014, you finished TJ and Amal, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I published volume 3, which is the final volume of the 3-volume series,
Right.
in May of 2014. It came out so close to TCAF that I actually had just the publisher straight up deliver 3 boxes of it to TCAF, and the rest got delivered to Austin after I got home. And then in 2015, the collected edition came out through Iron Circus, and with that was actually how I originally wanted to publish it, with the color pages intact and everything. But I knew I just didn't have the resources to do that on my own. So yeah, that was done in 2015, and I massaged a lot of the art and ballooning and such for that collected edition.
Well, I want to pick up on a thought that I just had, but I read, so I got the collected TJ and Amal from my school's library a couple weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And read it kind of both in the book and on the site, and it's interesting to compare the experiences. But no, I say that to say that like 2014 to 2022 is a wild span of time. Not that it's a long span of time. It's just a wild transitional period for the internet and webcomics, for you to
Life in
come
general,
back to it after that. 2014 was the year that Webtoon in America started existing as its own independent platform, and all of the sea change that I identify in my own like autobiographical history of this stuff has happened kind of since that moment, or since like 2012 to 2014.
Yeah.
So that must be disorienting. And a lot of the shift that you're talking about experiencing for the new comic, I resonate with, even though I have been more consistently serializing stuff in this space. But I had this when I was like wrapping up Vatu, which is the 12-year-long thing. I kind of went through this like this like vertigo feeling of like, oh my God, everything's changed. I have to rethink every aspect of how I self-publish online.
Yeah.
That fed into my new thing, but it was very condensed. Like I didn't have a years-long break from the space to for it to look extremely different. So I don't know. That's a wild experience.
Yeah, I did keep making comics during that time. I just wasn't necessarily making a webcomic.
Yeah.
And when I finished, I mean, I worked on TJ Mall for 7 years. I started it in late 2007. I started writing it, put it on the web in December 2009, and it ran for 5 years as a webcomic. I worked on it for 7 years, actually 8, counting the epilogues and the collected edition and everything. And when it was done, this thing that had brought me so much joy and had, all that time before I had, I enjoyed illustrating and doing fan art and little doodles and things, but I had never had a story come from myself and mean so much to me and mean so much with how I connected with other people. And then all of a sudden it was gone. And it was like something had just taken a big shovel and scooped out all of my guts and just taken them away. And I was empty and not even necessarily depressed, but just empty and blank for about 2 years.
This is an emptiness that, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This feeling you're talking about is about not having the place to put your creative energy or not having a relationship to an audience.
I think both of those things.
Okay.
More the creative energy, because the creative energy was gone. It was expended.
Yeah.
And I could still draw. I was still drawing for my day job. I was a technical illustrator for 9 years.
Oh yeah, I knew that. That's so cool.
I was a technical illustrator from 2009 to 2018. Mm-hmm. And so that was, I had a day job the entire time. So I was still drawing for my work. I was still illustrating for my work. I was still doing commissions at conventions and signing books and such. But I didn't have that one singular all-consuming story that I had been working on for, at that point, which was a seventh of my life. And people would ask, what are you doing next? What are you doing next? And not being able to answer that, I felt like I was just failing. I was failing at being an artist. And I was genuinely worried that I would never have another story again. And there were a couple of ideas that I had a couple of ideas in 2016 that may have had legs, but I could never quite get them to gel. There was a project I was supposed to be working on with several other artists through a major press that the wheels started turning on that, and then it fell apart at the actual press itself. I don't know how much detail I can go into about that. But that fell apart for reasons unrelated to me or the other artists involved, and I just kind of floundered around for about 3 years, feeling really aimless and lost, and I got very, very depressed, and just kind of floated around. And as cheesy as it sounds, I think the thing that started to kind of get me back out of it was I got really into this anime show called Yuri on Ice. And it felt weird to be liking characters that weren't my own. But it also got me making comics again, just because I was like, I want to play with these dolls. And I kind of wound up teaching myself Clip Studio that way. And that lasted for a couple of years. And then by that time, I had been working as a professional comics letterer for a couple of years. And then in October of 2020, that was when I finally got the idea for Shot and Chaser. And I could not have gotten, because of the nature of the story, I could not have gotten that idea sooner than I did. It was born organically out of where I was in my life and everything that was going on in the world.
Yeah.
And I do feel kind of taking 6 years or Yeah, taking 5.5, 6 years to come up with a new original story idea does kind of make me feel like a loser, but I also don't think I could have come up with this story any sooner.
I've had aspects of that. That's a miserable feeling. That anxiety that you've like exhausted all of your creative stuff.
That you burnt yourself
And that-
out, yeah.
Yeah, and that like it's some finite supply or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've had aspects of that feeling, but it's only as real as you believe it to be real. Probably, your stuff. You seem very. Just reading it, you seem very emotionally present in it, or something. There's something that I imagine pulls you through these comics as a creator that is a lot more like tied up in believing the characters and being emotionally invested in the characters than I am used to experiencing as a creator. Like there is some reason why both of these big projects that you have connected with to the extent that you have, made them yourself are about pairs of people and their relationship being examined in, just enormous detail. Like that's a particular sort of through line that interests me because it's kind of unusual. It's kind of unlike what has attracted me to making stories. But with Third Voice, the two main characters in that are very close and feel like more psychologically real to me and more developed and like believable to myself than I'm used to my own characters being. So I don't really have a like thought or a prompt there. I'm just like, it's interesting to see the sorts of things that have connected with you to the extent that you have committed to the projects. And I'm sure that you could have made something else work if you had. I'm sure that you could have powered through and made something else work that you weren't as automatically immediately invested in making. But Shot and Chaser is extremely beautifully done. So I'm glad that you're feeling it. I'm glad you're working on a thing that you feel.
Yeah, Shot and Chasers also, I've, since I know that the story is probably, I'm probably going to wrap it up in 2025, I'm like gearing, I've like talked to my therapist, I'm like, hey, just so you know, this is coming down the barrel. I'm kind of bracing myself for that, sense of loss of purpose and that emptiness again, because Shot and Chaser is, it's not spanning the amount of time in my life that TJ Namal did, but it's also far, far, far more intensely personal than TJ Namal was. So, yeah, I think part of the kind of going back to earlier, what you were talking about focusing on, just a relationship between two people. I think part of that is. Part of the reason for that decision narratively is I've enjoyed lots of shows and stories with multiple characters before, and I've thought up multiple characters of my own, but I find that keeping the scale small is what helps it feel doable. Like I don't worry about the story spinning out of control or going on too long or not knowing where to take it.
Yeah.
Keeping it just confined to two people over a short span of time, that's about the scale. I think that's the scale where my skills actually work.
That absolutely makes sense to me. And I mean, in a way, there's certain limitations built into the medium of comics made by an individual person, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a sensible way to look at it. It ends up feeling kind of like a stage play almost, because it's so. I guess your comics in particular are so unusually fixated on the little acting moments of the two characters and like really getting into their heads and their experience. It's it feels stage playish to me.
Well, I actually do have a kind of a background in theater, so that would track.
Yeah, I can see it. I've been thinking a lot about that because I have no background in theater or acting whatsoever, but I have lately been interested in like the ways that actors talk about working with a character and how they talk about like inventing an emotional reality for a character. And I just watched this movie, Husbands. Have you heard of this movie
No, I
from the
haven't.
70s? It's got Peter Falk, the Columbo
Oh,
guy.
yeah.
It's I kind of don't know if I even like it. It's about these three guys and their friend recently died, and they're kind of like coping with various midlife crises. But the way that it's presented is so much about just the actors. It's like you're just watching these spaces being given for actors to explore the characters. It's just an interesting angle on writing character that is so different from how I ever learned it. So I kind of want to know more about that. That's a bit of a tangent.
It sounds like the kind of movie I would be all about.
I feel that you might get something out of it.
I'm actually going to jot that down in my sketchbook here.
It's kind of the aspects of it are kind of gross, but there's some real charming bits. It is funny that talking to you, so in some ways, your experience of this is the polar opposite of KC's experience. Who I talked to. Do you know KC really?
Oh, yeah. We're not like super close, but I've met him a few times and talked with him online. He's a really, really sweet guy.
I love him.
Yeah, I really. I also listened to your episode with him that you recorded a few weeks ago and really enjoyed that.
Great. But this it feels kind of opposite.
Yeah.
You two, because
always been,
he had.
I've always been impressed by Casey's ability to just grab an idea and go, let's see where this takes me, and just spin something out of that, like without holding himself back. Whereas I'm like, I have to have everything plotted out, start to finish.
I feel that I feel like I have bounced between those two, but yeah, he was saying he struggles to commit to a longer thing. He's always thinking about like the next thing he's going to do or some other thing he would rather be working on or whatever. And you are talking about your work as if you have none of that, and it's all just you are committed to one project. The end of that project is just an entirely negative, depressive feeling.
It's staring
There's
into
no
the
part of
Grand
you-
Canyon, essentially.
Is there no part of you that's like, I'm excited to get to the end of this because then I can, think more openly, creatively about something else? Or do you not have that experience?
It's funny, like a lot of I am still doing like more experimental and like pushing personal boundaries in my creative work, but that's all happening in my professional creative work. Shot and Chaser is a labor of love. It doesn't make me any money. I do have Patreon backers who enjoy it, but primarily my Patreon is based on like providing stickers and things with a monthly subscription. But yeah, Shot and Chaser has not been acquired by anyone. It's not in print. It's not making me any money. So, what I do to pay the bills is I do comic book lettering, and that's actually the area where I'm experimenting a little bit more these days. I'm lettering for everything from children's comedy books on up to straight up porn. I am lettering for about 6 different publishers, and each one has a different house style. Actually, right before I got on this call with you, I was kind of experimenting with different approaches to sound effects for animals versus objects. I mean, I'm really playing around in that field right now. And Shot and Chaser is very much in like the wheelhouse that I was in previously, even though I'm also kind of pushing the boundaries there with regards to like character acting and even a little bit of sound effects in that one too, especially during the tornado scenes.
Oh man, that tornado part is awesome. Towards the end of what's there now. I mean, it's really like you're doing some very formally inventive stuff in a way that like I feel like because your drawing style and story and narrative approach generally is kind of literalistic. I feel like the ways in which you're really formally inventive, maybe are a little under the radar or whatever, but there's some wild shit you're doing with like color and that weird halftone pattern and shit. So cool.
That's all just like that's also just experimenting. That's settled. The later pages that I'm working on now, it's kind of settled down into a more like conventional palette and everything. But yeah, I really, I guess, lettering, comic book lettering is me playing around technically, and Shot and Chaser is me playing around more conceptually. And it's also, as much as hard as it is, labor wise, and as difficult as it is to write, because it has been difficult. It's work that I enjoy doing, but it is very much work. A lot of Shot and Chaser is just like me having I gave myself an excuse to write and draw the things I love, which was, I want to write like, okay, I want to write characters whose lives are a little more similar to mine, who talk like I do, who also live in Texas. I've always been fascinated by storms and tornadoes. I kind of grew up not directly in Tornado Alley, but I grew up in a really tornado-prone area. And I've always been interested in storm chasing, and it was just like, fuck it, I'll make a comic about this, and an interpersonal relationship and a bunch of storm clouds. And if people like it, they like it. But it's for me, essentially.
If people like it, they like it. Do you have some sense of do people like it, and how much crossover is there from TJ and Amal all those years ago, audience wise?
I don't think there's very much. I think a lot of people who've been reading Shot and Chaser, who've talked to me about it, like actually don't know about TJ and Amal, and I'm like, oh yeah, I did this other comic a while back. Or some of them will be like, oh wow, I heard of that a long time ago. But in internet years, 6 to 8 years is, it might as well be 3 generations. It might as well be like, I don't know, someone saying like, hey Ike, have you watched this movie from 1989?
Right.
So that's another thing that's kind of proven difficult, is I can't really rely on, like, TJ and Amal did have, it wasn't like a banger, but it was pretty well received. It won some awards. And I can't really, all of that has faded off into the mist, so I couldn't really go, hey, now come check this out. I'm essentially building everything from scratch again, audience-wise. Which has its upsides and downsides. They're similar stories in that they're both about interpersonal relationships during a difficult time. But I think the vibes are very different. Having been written at different times in my life.
And the scope of the story is very different. And yeah, it's hard to say how much crossover there could even be, though. I mean, it was a big deal, TJ and Amal. You got to think that there's some people, well, like me, who remember that and bring that knowledge into the new thing. But yeah, it's tricky to say. I'm always struck by like people who say that they've been reading my stuff for years and years and years. I wish that there were more. I wish that there were more people who were coming to it new,
Yeah.
But I feel like if you're doing this sort of grandfathered in, old-timey webcomics thing, maybe that's the way it's going to be. That's not a complete thought. Okay, I'm really trying to focus on what I'm saying here.
Okay, so if the mailman comes, we will not be interrupted by barking.
Okay, well, no big deal if so. So TJ and Amal has been in print since 2015. I mean, it seems to be consistently out there. It's things don't totally evaporate. I understand that like a comic that hasn't been actively serializing for years is sort of has less pop cultural purchase, but it is still out there, and people do still talk about it.
Yeah,
and it's still
I think,
good.
it makes me happy that it was supposed to go into its third printing earlier this year. I think things kind of got held up at the publisher, so I'm not really sure what the status of that is at this point. But you know, I have I have no gauge really for what constitutes success, and at this point, partly because, and I once again, this is something I've talked about with in therapy, with friends, with colleagues, which is that I am so lucky and so blessed to have a social circle that is composed of remarkably creative, remarkably smart people. And many of those people have gone on to have extraordinary success. So that's like the very narrow slice of the population that I find myself in. And so that's my point of comparison. So
Right.
I'm sitting here like, oh, I have no gauge of whether my book is good or not because I'm friends with like 3 people who are on the New York Times bestseller list. Like
Yeah.
my perception is so completely skewed that I genuinely don't know, where it stands. But it does make me happy that it's in. It does make me happy that it's in libraries. It does make me happy that people still read it. And that big thick omnibus, that is really how it's meant to be read. From the start, I really wanted it to be one book.
Yeah.
One
It's a
singular
beautiful
volume.
book. You don't know. You say you don't know, but you do know in a way because you committed. You knew that it was worth committing all this work to make these things. You had to believe in it in some sort of way, and like this is the thing I'm trying to figure out or like wrap my head around lately, in particular, because it's a big part of the case I'm trying to make to my students. Like what is being a success? Like you make a space for the work that you want to make. I feel like we're still kind of in a miraculous moment in the culture where it is possible to make a space for really exactly the work that one wants to make, and that's a fucking successful thing. The idea that like, because I mean everybody thinks that like there's a point at which the work is done or like you have become a success or whatever. And coming up, I thought that there were all these like, I'm sure I've said this before, but I thought that there were all these like barriers I would break and then I would become a success.
You'll
and,
finally
I've
feel it
gotten
in your bones, yeah.
Yeah, and I've gotten like the stuff with publishers or whatever, but it just keeps going. No one ever tells you when you're done. You just have to believe in the work that you're doing, I guess. And if you're doing it on your own, on no guarantee of financial return or whatever, then you must believe in it.
Yeah, and that's the no financial return aspect has been kind of difficult in that, like, if someone would say, do you think you're successful in comics? I would say yes, because, as a letterer, I'm making ends meet, which is, one, in comics is no small feat, and two, working in comics in Austin is no small feat. I mean, as a New Yorker, I'm sure, you've also got struggles with rent and bills. So just the fact that, I'm able to make the bills is, pretty, like, by lettering comics is pretty wild.
That's great. And I mean, you are the work that you're. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting.
Oh, it's okay. The downside is that, like, in order to do all this lettering work, which I do enjoy, I really do love lettering. In order to do this lettering work that pays the bills, it also means that I have maybe 4 hours a week to do Shot and Chaser, which, I look around and I see, some of my other friends who are also making comics, who get to do it like for a living, like make their own work for a living. Or their spouse supports them and they can make their own work as long as they want. I start to think like, that's really where I want to be at. Or like, if I could turn down 2 or 3 lettering gigs to have 10 hours a week to work on Shot and Chaser, that would be
Yeah.
ideal.
I mean, that feels like a plausible thing to me. Look at the you're squeezing in this work on this comic now for free, but it's not like this is free work that's being demanded of you. It's
No.
work that you're doing for
it.
yourself that you will eventually get all of the return on, whatever return there is. You own it. So
Yeah.
like, it's entirely plausible that it'll get published by some big publisher, and at the very least you get some big advance. Maybe more. Maybe it keeps going past that.
And that's the thing I've been kind of trying to cling to. And thank you for the little perspective check there, because it's so easy to get, mired in, I guess, down in the muck of my own limited view, and go, oh, I'm not doing it like XYZ. I'm doing it like me. What am I doing wrong? It's like, no, you're just doing it like you. It's fine.
I mean, I have that impulse too. I just like I've tried to short circuit it in myself to like it feels so self-defeating to
Yeah.
get too sucked into it to me.
Yeah, I still fall into that self-defeating. I fall into that self-defeating impulse, which is, kind of tied into, the depressive tendencies and such, which a lot of artists have. And yeah, I try to keep it in check by going like, yeah, but you're still going to draw anyway because you love it. And, also, when, again, you're in this very narrow slice of the creative world and have a very skewed view. And you're not, again, it's, like what people say about, trying not to judge your life by people's Instagrams, which is like, you're seeing the highlight reel, you're living the backstage part, but you're only seeing other people's highlight reels. So try not to compare yourself to that.
Yeah. I mean, thank God you like doing this stuff.
If I didn't,
What
I
would
wouldn't.
the point of any of it be?
And then we were all sitting around the dining room table talking, and my dog, my German Shepherd, Dani, came and sat under the table, and everyone's like, oh, what a sweet dog. And then she farted. And it stank up the whole room, and I was just sitting there like, okay, well, if I survive this, I can survive anything.
I love a dog, man. That was fun. I like that show.
That's back again. They finally started it up again this past year.
Yeah, I'm going to say we're ending the parenthetical. By the way, I'm going to be I'm going to be saving the recording now.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Oh, no. Sorry, I'm just letting you know what's up. I stopped doing conventions, obviously, and then like realizing that I could still sort of career-wise and like emotionally maintain my life not doing 8 or 10 of them a year.
Yeah.
I'm like doing way less now, but I do miss doing a lot of them.
Yeah,
Staple, I really loved.
they're strictly work for me now. I mean, it's again enjoyable work, but it's still work. But I do. Before COVID, I was doing I think 2 or 3 a year. Texas being huge, it's very hard to travel. It's very expensive to travel outside of Texas. And so I can't really do out-of-state cons unless I know I'm going to make at least twice what I spent to get there. And that just hasn't happened since like 2017. So, but
Well, just wait for that fucking Shot and Chaser book to be out,
man,
man.
fingers crossed. I haven't been to to SPX since 2012. And everyone was so welcoming. I had such a good time. But yeah, because I since I can't afford to travel to out-of-state cons unless I am like debuting a book or unless a con brings me in as a guest, I'm basically, I can't really go back until I have Shot and Chaser as a published book. So I'll hopefully be back there again someday soon.
Yeah, SPX is like the big one. It feels like but yeah, books are the thing that kind of make it. I think just in terms of economies of scale.
Yeah.
That's I had a book. I wasn't doing conventions before I had books in print, so so I can't really compare it, but it does feel like the thing that makes it possible.
Yeah. Which is funny because they're such a pain to travel with, but
Yeah, I ship a lot, or I have my publisher or my one of my publishers or my distributor ship it or something. But yeah, God, it's such a fucking hassle, and it was so much easier when I was 23 or whatever.
yeah.
Well, if you ever come back to SPX, I look forward to seeing you.
I look forward to seeing you too. Yeah, I'd love to make it back to FlameCon. I'd love to make it back to SPX. I did TCAF in 2019 and had a wonderful time, but I lost so much money doing that show. I can't really afford to go back again.
I have found that one kind of expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, getting to Canada from Texas is just very costly. But it's a wonderful, wonderful show.
One thing I'm interested in is that it seems like a consistent thing for you for years to make like little spin-off stories about the characters in your comics, either of the big comics. Well, a lot of them tend to be more overtly sexual, right? Explicitly sexual. But I wonder what the impulse is for you to like expand the project in that way.
I mean, part of it is I just straight up enjoy drawing porn. But I don't get the impulse or inspiration to draw porn that often. So usually I'll have like an idea that's a small enough scale that I can confine it to, 20 or 40 pages. And often it'll be something like with the TJ and Amal side comic. It was something that took place during I could have shoved it into the main story, but it would have kind of broken up the momentum, I think. Mm-hmm. And it works as a standalone story. But it also...
I've not read that one. Is that Whisper
Yes.
Grass or whatever?
Yeah, that's Whisper Grass. And that takes place... Their trip lasts 10 days in the story, and I think that takes place on like the 7th night. They're in Tennessee, I think. Either Tennessee or Kentucky. And yeah, it's just like a fun little side bit. I don't think there's any character information that's... Oh, no, like... I guess overt character information that's not in the main book, except like a small conversation that they have about, appreciating small things in life and their different approach to observing those little details. But yeah, I mean, it's just fun to draw porn. It's fun to explore the way characters interact in that sexual context, because it requires a physical and personal vulnerability that even like a dangerous situation or a friendly situation or talking in a diner or talking in a car, the dynamic is just different. And it also opens up avenues for some really goofy comedy.
Yeah.
Like I think there is, if you're drawing something that's intended to be seen as erotic, it requires a certain level of vulnerability and sincerity that I really enjoy putting into my work, even though it's also the equivalent of me just straight up opening my rib cage to the audience and going, "Hey, have at."
Is it? In what way is it like that?
I did an interview specifically about this with another comic artist, or actually with a journalist a while back. I don't know if I'll have to ask if I can publish this or put it up online. I don't know if they're done with it or not. But there's a certain vulnerability inherent in letting the world know what you find hot, especially if it doesn't line up with what you're told you should find hot.
Oh yeah, I guess I understand that. I have no. I have no. I've had conversations about this because it's a normal thing for people to make art about their sexual dimension or whatever, but I have no impulse towards that. I horniness to me is a thing. It occupies a separate realm from my creative
art, yeah.
work or something. So, but I guess I understand that. But like, But isn't? But it's fiction. I mean, you're telling these stories about what these particular people in the story think is hot, right? Yeah. But still, I understand the anxiety.
Well,
I
yeah,
understand what you mean.
like part of the like the hot aspect of it is like because I'm interested in these particular characters, like what would this person exactly say? Like one of the, and this isn't necessarily even like an erotic aspect, but like one of the things I enjoyed so much about writing the Shot and Chaser offshoot, Sweet Abilene, is really getting inside the main character. Well, the Shot and Chaser has two main characters. One of them is Ollie, the one with the long brown hair. And he is an incredibly anxious and insecure person. So it was really fun, both like exploring these characters in that way, but also like writing from the inside of this person's head, who is so anxious and so insecure. And part of the joy of that particular comic, that particular story, is him just going, oh, I can relax. Oh, I'm actually loved and accepted here. Okay.
Yeah. That's a relatable feeling. It makes sense that this sort of work, in particular with characters that you develop elsewhere, would interest you because the comics, the main comics are so, as I said earlier, are so fixated on like, characters acting and communicating, and like that's like sex is just
That's
a
another
space
form of
for that.
communication,
Right, in a more heightened and interesting way. It interests me sometimes to like, what if I made a little spin-off comic about my characters doing some other thing, or like what happened to them in this unspoken for part of the main narrative or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm so uptight in particular about how things get revealed in a given story that I'm making. That I short circuit that impulse, because like, what if somebody reads it in the wrong order, or what if somebody gets information that I don't want them to have yet, or something? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And that's,
I mean, your stuff is less continuity obsessed, maybe, so maybe that's less of a concern for you. But I feel like some of the dynamic might be there.
oh yeah, I mean that's part of why Sweet Abilene actually takes place 4 years before the main takes place 4 years before Shot and Chaser. Because like it's at the very beginning of Trey and Ollie, the two main characters, in Sweet Abilene, which is the like porn side comic. That's like they've been friends for 10 odd years, but it's like at the very beginning of their relationship as a couple. Whereas in Shot and Chaser, they've been together for several years. They've been through a few things. That initial rush has kind of cooled off. They're also like dealing with each other's idiosyncrasies a little bit more. And so just the dynamic isn't completely different, but their priorities are in different places, and there are different things on their minds, in those two different time frames.
And you're saying the time frames are so different that there's less of a danger of like overly contextualizing the main story?
Yeah,
sort of?
I think so, because there's like the body language in the main comic, in Shot and Chaser, like there is indication like, okay, these two obviously have feelings for each other. It's not, there may not be, their type of relationship may not be named, but they're obviously very close, a little more than friends. We don't know, it's not really necessary that you know more than that. And it becomes clear through context that they've been close for years and years and years.
Talking of pornography, the sort of cultural and hegemonic attitudes towards overtly sexual content is something that has dramatically changed in the years in between you making both of these comics.
Yeah.
I assume. I mean, what has your experience like that been?
I feel like I'm gonna have to think about this for a second.
I could tighten up the question if you like.
It's okay. Like I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I think that working independently and not necessarily being a, capital B big name, kind of shielded me from a lot of the worst of that change. Actually, all of the like comics that I've drawn, I've printed them all through the same publisher. Not publisher, but printer. I've done them all independently. And no, I take that back. I've done comics for Smut Peddler, which is published through Iron Circus. And
a famously libertine publisher.
yes. And two of those comics, how many, yeah, two, I've done 4 comics for Smut Peddler, and 2 of them were offshoots of TJ and Amal, both taking place several years before the main story, to where, like, you wouldn't have had to read TJ and Amal to know,
Right.
for those to make sense. And the other 2 were original, one written by Spike Trotman, who owns Iron Circus, and was the editor of Smut Peddler. One written by Spike Trotman, one written by myself. They're original. But I feel like operating mostly independently and not being a huge name, even as an independent artist, helped me avoid a lot of the, I guess, nastier scrutiny that a lot of erotic artists have faced in recent years. It has been,
Well, that's cool.
it has been difficult trying to, I guess, get word out on social. I think that's been the big change that I've noticed, is that it's much more difficult for me to get the word out about these comics on social media now than it was 10 years ago or 8 years ago. In fact, I mentioned this in a convention panel that I just did with Nero O'Reilly, that there was a big cross promotion that another comic artist that I'm friends with put together, a group of independently produced porn comics that all featured transgender characters, and Sweet Abilene was offered as part of that bundle. And when I tried to boost the posts that the coordinator made about this on social media, when I tried to like boost and share their posts going, hey, this transgender themed comics bundle is out, go check it out. Everything I retweeted from them was hidden. Everything I reposted from them was hidden. Like I would retweet their posts about it and then check my timeline and they'd be gone.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I wound up just having to completely make my own posts from scratch and then point them towards the project myself, because everything by the project coordinator had been suppressed. And that has been, like, algorithmic suppression and censorship, that has been, I think, probably the biggest obstacle that I personally have faced.
Yeah. I think, every independent artist has faced that in some kind of way.
Yeah.
Maybe less so if it's overtly culture war adjacent material like that or whatever. But God, it's gotten weird. And the fact that these are all just, that it's all black boxes and you don't exactly know what's happening or according to what logic or whatever.
Yeah.
Is disgusting. I hope all that shit burns down soon.
Yep.
Twitter and all that. It's bound to happen.
I took the earlier part of this afternoon to refresh, like to reread and then catch up on Third Voice. And one thing I was kind of noticing reading that, like you mentioned that like your work tends to have a much larger scope, character and world-wise than mine does. But one thing I've noticed that I think I would say that our comics have in common is trusting the reader, like refusing to just hand info or just spoon feed info to the reader and trusting them to pick up on context.
Yeah.
Which is something
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's something I personally enjoy in storytelling and something I enjoy doing and something I also a lot of times like what I enjoy doing as a storyteller isn't necessarily what I enjoy reading, but that is something that I also enjoy, when reading a story is being trusted, to not need my hand held through it.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely a governing logic of like every aspect of how I write. I guess I can see that resonance. You have a deft hand with that stuff too. Even if the questions of like what is to be conveyed are very different, because I'm in secondary world fantasy and you're in like very rigorously
very real world
moment to moment historical contexts. Well, I appreciate that. There's a lot of synchronicities, honestly, between, I think about like both of us making kind of unusually ambitious and straightforward graphic novel type comics on the internet at a time when that wasn't quite done yet.
Yeah.
I think we have similar sort of literalistic approaches to storytelling. Just very different genre traditions. I guess it's easy to see this now because it's no longer 2008, but TJ and Amal is very fixated on like situating everything in the moment in history in which it's happening. What did that look like as you were doing it? How did you think of that?
When I first started drafting the story, like as it kind of started taking shape in late 2007, like the more I got familiar with the characters, the more I was like, okay, I need to make this into a story. I need to make this into a cohesive thing. I started to. It's hard to explain. A lot of it was just, I want to say vibes based, but there was something about it that said, I was writing it in 2008. I did the bulk of the writing in the spring of 2008, which is when the story takes place. But basically from the get-go, I was like, this has to take place at least it has to be in the second half of the Bush administration. I don't know why. That's just where it needs to be. And then there's just something about the vibe of where everything was at the time nationally. I think their particular story was partially born out of this sense of anxiety, but also potential that I kind of felt was in the air at the time. And as
I remember that.
And yeah, it's like setting it right. I think it takes place either right before or right after the Democratic primaries in May 2008. And writing that story, which takes place over 10 days, and then like finishing it up in 2014 and like researching things and going like locations and certain aspects of places and going like, this literally can't happen. Like, I couldn't have this story take place like as a contemporary comic strip. Like this, everything is different now. Just 6 years later. Like the final scene wouldn't have even happened that way. Like, where he goes and gets the directions written on the napkin. Like he would just use Google Maps. I think the bridge.
Oh, yeah,
there's
that
a
is
bridge that he
wild.
goes over that's just straight up not there anymore.
So it seems like you were very particular about sort of setting details like that.
Yeah, part of the reason for that is I enjoy doing that kind of thing. It's fun to go down a research rabbit hole. And I've done that a lot for Shot and Chaser too, and it's been much more difficult for Shot and Chaser because I do not have a brain for hard science. And so I've had to have a lot of like, please explain these atmospheric graphs to me like I am 5 years old. But yeah, with TJ and Amal, I think it was partly that I enjoyed doing the research, but also there have been times where I've watched movies that take place in Austin, and there'll be some teeny tiny detail that is totally inconsequential to the flow of the story. Someone who's never been to Austin or has never lived in Austin watching this movie would not, it would make a difference to them. But I'll be thrown out of the story for just a couple seconds by going, oh, that's not how you get there. Or, oh, they're trying to get, there's this film that I really enjoyed, directed by Jon Favreau called Chef. And it's just about it's about a chef who starts up a food truck. And part of the movie takes place in Austin, and there's a bit where they're like, okay, well, we have to go from Austin to here now. And that shows them driving down the 360 bridge, which is a beautiful scenic shot, but it's also not how you get where they're going. And it shook me out of the story for 2 seconds, and then I was back in. But it was enough that I noticed it. And when I was making TJ Animal, I was like, I want this. I don't want anybody to be shaken out of this. And if anybody is shaken out, I wanted it to be because they're doing that Leonardo DiCaprio pointing thing at something accurate. And 99. Brett and I call this. Brett's my partner. We call these 2%ers. Which is like 2%, like 98% of people are never going to notice. They're never going to get the joke, but you throw it in for that 2%. And it, 99% of readers do not notice, do not care. It's fine, as long as the story makes sense. But I've gotten a couple of emails from people who really got a kick out of like certain details, including especially there's a scene that takes place in St. Louis where the characters go into a Goodwill store. And someone wrote me several years ago saying, hey, I just read your book and I got kicked out of that Goodwill back in the 70s for making out with my girlfriend in there. Like,
oh my God.
And like, I still remember how the layout was. So that kind of thing, it just totally made my day.
That's wild. I've never encountered that I don't do stories like that, so I never would have encountered that. But I feel like there's parallel things in like secondary world stuff. Like with Third Voice, there's a somewhat limited but plausible, functional, invented language that goes throughout the whole setting, and there's signs written in it and everything. And that's a 2%er thing, because there's a couple people on my Discord who like really have figured a lot of it out and are treating it as if it's an actual system.
I was wanting to ask you about that because I am a language nerd. So I was like super intrigued by the writing system and everything. I was like, I wonder how cohesive this writing system, like how workable it really is, or if it's primarily decorative or what.
It's not decorative. So for the oversight stuff for like Vaatu and everything, I made up alphabets. I made up scripts basically, but there's no actual language. For Third Voice, there is currently one actual invented language. It's not a cipher or whatever. It's an invented thing with its own grammar and its own its own lexicon and theoretical history. The writing that you see in the comic is basically just a kind of simple and variably applied alphabet that I just thought looked interesting enough. So like the experience for the 98% It's just that like,
oh, this is what this
this all
is.
feels like a this all feels like a believably textured fictional world,
Yeah.
but it all actually is stuff, you know.
That's so cool.
And I'm never gonna reveal.
Yeah.
Like I'm never gonna release
The dictionary.
the dictionary or whatever. Yeah, but over the course of the comic, there will be enough context, I assume, that in some years from now, people can plausibly translate
This
more of it
corresponds
than
to
they have
this
so far.
sound or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, they've got that down.
Aw,
They
that's so
figured out
cool.
they figured out the writing system, but not all of the language itself.
I've never been able to like figure that out backwards, but I love that sort of thing. I've never gotten to do that myself. One of the I have like one or two like vague fantasy, worlds in my head, but no cohesive story to really go with them. And the closest I've ever gotten to doing anything like that is the Smut Peddler story that Spike Trotman wrote, which takes place in a fantasy world that is like technologically at about the equivalent of 1943 or so, and which immediately grabbed me because fantasy worlds with like that that aren't necessarily medieval, I love that kind of thing. But I actually did cook up like a basic syllabic alphabet. There are two nations at war, and one I gave like that it doesn't show up as much. I gave like a very basic, not basic, but like a pictographically based kind of Hanzi like writing system, and the other one I based their alphabet off of like a combination of Cyrillic and Thai letters, and came up with a basic syllabary for that. And
Cool.
that was so much fun. I spent probably more time on that than I should have, but
Yeah, it can be it can be kind of a trap because
Yeah.
it's. I mean, there's a lot of world building adjacent concerns that it is easy to get sucked really far into building something systematic and cohesive and lose sight, in my experience at least, and according to my aesthetic, it's easy to like lose sight of the value of the thing in the story, which is just like,
what does this serve
something to add
exactly?
verisimilitude or something. Yeah. But, those sorts of getting wrapped up in making something like that, that's the engine that makes all this shit possible, getting obsessed with the thing you want to make, right?
And that's I think that's probably why it takes me so long to make or to cook up new stories, is I have to get obsessed. There's when I was making all those fan comics for Yuri on Ice, I wasn't necessarily obsessed with the characters of that show as much as I get obsessed with my own, but there was some sort of outlet there that I related to. The characters were believable and lovable enough that I was like, okay, I can latch onto this. This is my my life preserver, helping me climb up out of the ocean and into a boat and start making comics again.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I'm actually, a lot of the stuff that I'm curious about is like relating to is asking you questions about your storytelling decisions. So
You feel free to do that.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I was noticing one of the things that I really love, like going back over Third Voice. That's the only one that, and one of the downsides of having, I do like doing all this lettering work. One of the downsides of having so much work is I don't have time to read comics or go to movies or really play video games anymore. So I'm missing out on so much right now. So I did only have time to go through Third Voice. But one of the things...
I mean, third Voice is the one I'm doing now, so it's all I care about, so that's fine with me.
Oh, yeah. But one of the things that I really appreciated, and I think this is also another area where you and I agree storytelling-wise, is that sometimes there's ways that there are certain behaviors that I notice, especially Spondule has, that like aren't, they don't necessarily make sense to the reader, but they make sense to him. Like, and you're not going to just hold the reader's hand and say, hey, he's feeling like this is resonating with him in this way, and this is why he reacts to this. You just have to trust. You're like, this is just who he is. This is, you know why, and the character knows why he's doing what he's doing. But
I don't know that he does, but I do.
yeah, well, like he has his reasons, even if he doesn't consciously know them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of writers in comics and TV and all sorts of media are. I don't think enough writers have their characters behave inconsistently as real, fully fleshed out people do. Like there's a certain set of traits and behaviors that they have to stick to in order to be consistent. Whereas
Yeah, I know what you mean.
really believable characters will, like, they're illogical. They have quirks. They, they'll do something unexpected every so often. And I think that makes a character so much more believable.
Oh, I feel that. I appreciate that. I part of this is that like I felt claustrophobic in a lot of ways doing Vaatu, which is like a much more straightforward, like it's not high fantasy, I guess, but it's a fantasy story concerned with like big mythic historical questions. And all the characters, I tried to do something psychologically real with them, but they all kind of communicate like characters in a fantasy story. And Third Voice, I want it to be psychologically real. I want them to be really plausible people, and they feel kind of real to me. And it feels kind of like how simple do you think people are if you expect characters to act in a consistent and stereotyped way? Like, aren't you a human being? Don't you understand that contradiction is a part of it,
Yeah, I really enjoyed like going back over it. I was like, oh, this is so good. Like the part where there's a bit where he's so frustrated with Navi, like he's in tears, frustrated, and then he's just like, well, you almost expect like in the hands of another writer, I'd be like, okay, this is where these characters split up because they've had this fight, and then it's like later he's like, well, this is who she is, and like, I don't know, it's the way that they kind of accept each other's idiosyncrasies even when they drive each other crazy. I really enjoy that.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, this is, as I said, this is the project that I feel like is has more of the similar interests that I have seen in your work. So it's nice that you resonate with it.
Yeah, it's
I mean, I thank you. I feel the pull as I'm making it kind of to make it a more like high fantasy story and to have the big questions be like the world questions or the geopolitical questions or the setting questions or whatever. But the thing that has been most true to me throughout working on this project is like the characters and their limited marginal experience of the world. Mm-hmm. So like the question of why is Spondule such a reactive shithead in this situation kind of has to be more motivating to me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Than what is the geopolitical status quo? All that stuff is there and is a part of it, but it's not. I have to trust that that's not the thing to pull me through the story.
Yeah, like those big geopolitical and political questions do affect the characters' lives. I mean, that's the case in Shot and Chaser too, definitely. But
that's the case in reality as well.
But it's not like this isn't necessarily a story about COVID or about the queer experience. It's about these two people and how they have to deal with the world around them, deal with each other, deal with themselves.
Yeah, the COVID thing. I mean, TJ and Amal feels very, very clearly locked into its moment in like diegetic history.
Yeah.
But the COVID thing really situates Shot and Chaser in an interesting way because it does kind of become a way of expressing or intensifying some of the story's concerns.
Yeah.
But also, it's still shocking to see it in fiction, to see the early pandemic period
Yeah, that's been
presented.
that's been an interesting part to work with. You know, I started writing the story in October of 2020, and you know, now working on it in 2024, I have to like. It's kind of like when I was finishing up TJ and Amal, and I had to go back and research. Okay, what was this 5 years ago? And I have to remember, like, okay, this isn't in 2024. This is in 2020. This is in May 2020. Like, they're not even calling it COVID. They're calling it Corona. And
Right.
like, there's a scene where they go to a gas station and they're wearing rubber gloves at the gas station because we don't know if it's surface transmitted yet or not. But yeah, also the it also, this wasn't, I didn't go into it with this in mind. It was also kind of like when I started TJ and Amal, I was like, this has to be during the second Bush administration. With Shot and Chaser, I was like, this has to be during COVID. I don't know why, it just does. And it wound up kind of accidentally becoming a way to show, you know, one, to express, you know, the isolation that the characters feel, that a lot of people were feeling at the time because of lockdown, but also a way to express kind of how of their environment Trey and Ollie are, but also how separated from it they are. By, you know, because you see them wearing masks and you don't really see other people doing so until they actually encounter another pair of scientists on the road.
Right.
Or, you know, like who's wearing a mask, who isn't, who's taking care of themselves, who isn't, like, I mean, it's still a pretty politicized issue today, but especially in Texas and especially in rural Texas, there was a very heavy dividing line, even in those early days.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it was an exacerbating thing immediately. Like it just sort of intensified the ways that we think about a lot of different things. So it makes sense that it would be an intensifying thing within a narrative structure too. Like it becomes a lens through which you can focus the concerns of the story. I don't know. I hadn't thought about it as it's wild to me to try to incorporate something in my recent lived experience into a story like that. It wouldn't have occurred to me, but it's interesting to see what you do with it.
Yeah, in some ways, it's kind of like with the having your own website thing. Sometimes I feel like that I'm limiting, or I'm like shooting myself in the kneecap by having the story set in such a specific time and place. But on the other, if I tried to make it timeless, I think it would lose a lot of what makes it compelling to me.
Yeah. And I mean, you're going for verisimilitude in various ways. This was a thing that happened, remember?
Yeah.
We all remember. So, like, you are pointing at something real. I mean, you can't tell how something that you make will look in the future or whatever, but you're coming at it from an honest place.
Yeah. Yeah, there were certain bits of TJ and Amal that I actually had written in 2007 and 2008 and wound up cutting because they were too on the nose by the time I actually got to where I needed to draw those pages.
Like what sort of stuff?
Oh, I forget exactly what the line was, but there was originally, like, just not even necessarily like making a political statement, but the characters were just like offhandedly talking about the election. Like, there's a brief bit where they're sitting in a diner and there's like election coverage on the TV.
Yeah.
And Amal just is like, hey, who are you voting for? And TJ's like, well, I can't vote. I don't have any ID. And that's about where that conversation ends. And originally in the script, it went on a little longer. And I forget exactly what there wasn't really a joke, but Amal made some sort of sarcastic crack about like, we're never going to have a non-white president or something like that. And then I was like, I have to cut this because it's too, like, it feels like I'm winking at the camera, even though this was written, at that time. It's like, this is too wink nudge now, even though that's not how it was intended. So I just had to nix that whole line of conversation.
I think that's a good impulse. I mean, I see movies sometimes that'll do that. Like, they'll have this like really snarky, engaging in the discourse type of dialogue sometimes, like they're writing it for Twitter or something. It feels like that is a thing that writers will get sucked into. Not that you are doing that, but I think that's a good impulse. Because the important thing is the characters and their momentum through the story. So it's appropriate that the thing that you hear is that line about the ID,
Yeah. And I mean, and again, that goes away from like the larger situation to just like, this tells you a little bit more about TJ's situation as a person, kind of existing on the fringes of society.
Yeah. Elegant. Again, you're not explaining. It would diffuse too much to biographize him completely. It's so much. It's got so much more energy that you just have these little glimpses of what on earth is going on that collapse into the climax or the wherever that is in the middle of the story that collapse into the sort of drama between them. But I don't know. It really feels fucking elegantly done. I know it feels weird to talk so much about something that you made 10 years ago or whatever, but I just reread it and I do love it.
Characters.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the things that's been a real challenge as a writer, that was a challenge then and is a challenge now. There's the climax of Shot and Chasers coming up, or the second climax, I guess, is coming up, is when a character needs to kind of monologue a little bit, or they divulge some key information. I always try to keep it the verbal aspect to a minimum and keep most of it in body language, because that's the more honest part. But, kind of with the climax of TJ and Amal, it was like, okay, no, he actually does need to come out and say some things. But the big challenge that I really relish taking on, again, it's hard work, but it's work I love doing, is this character is giving you this information, but they're giving it from their perspective, which may not be accurate. And so, you've got TJ who's coming at things, from his limited perspective, and then you have Trey and Ollie who are each going through their own thing and not really connecting. Like they're both each so absorbed in their own problems that their relationship may not be connecting in that moment. So they're going to have like a messed up viewpoint as it relates to each other. So trying to filter the information that needs to get through to the other character and to the reader through that flawed perspective and through those personal flaws, it's a real challenge, but I love doing it.
Cool. Yeah, that's got juice. That's got potential energy. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's occasionally like a thing that I'll enjoy doing is kind of posing a question to my characters, like as if they were being interviewed, and then having them answer it, and kind of being surprised by the answers. I did just a little drawing exercise to kind of warm up the other day, which was, what does masculinity mean to you? Because all four of my main characters are guys, and like trying to get into their headspace and write what their answer would be from their own perspective was a really energizing exercise to do for about half an hour.
Interesting. I've never done anything like that. I have trouble thinking about part of this is because everything takes place within this constructed setting probably, but I have trouble thinking about like characters that I work with outside of the context of the story. I wonder if that would be productive for me.
Or like, what would you do if presented with this object, or, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk briefly through this big idea that I may have talked about with Casey too. Here's my big idea. I think that comics have always been tied in some way to their original publication format and the particularities of the industries of like comic printing, book printing, periodical distribution, whatever. A thing that I'm realizing now, kind of in retrospect, that the internet opened up is that it made it possible for us to tell stories in comics way bigger and more contiguously than we initially could. Like there were graphic novels kind of before the internet, but the idea of making something as focused and contiguous as like a TJ in a mall or a Rice Boy around the same time is was kind of wild. Like we couldn't have really imagined that, I feel like, before webcomics. Does that resonate to you? I mean, did it feel like a revelation to start making something at that scale?
Well, it's funny because when I started making TJ and a Mall, it was like, okay, well, this is going to be just a small, this is about 2 people and it takes place over 10 days. This is going to be a small story. And then it's, splayed out into, decompressed out into 550 or 530 pages. I think one of the things I really do love about webcomics as a medium and the internet is that, if someone had made, a fully idiosyncratic, personally produced story, like cohesive, long-spanning story in, 1978 or 1990 and made, a full graphic novel, there's no guarantee that anyone would publish it. There's no guarantee that it would be distributed. And, again, anything finding an audience comes down to a matter of chance in the end. But with the internet, you can at least seek out, or used to be able to seek out and find, like-minded readers, or things would get around through word of mouth and not necessarily require, postage in a Xerox machine, or, printing and binding. You can tell your stories and have your story reach someone, even if it's not commercially viable, in a way that a publisher would make them money. And that's something I really treasure.
Yeah, it still feels like miraculous. I know that it's harder, and starting out from scratch now, I can't even really imagine how one would do it. But still, at least you can publish your big comic without spending thousands and thousands of dollars on printing it and distributing it or whatever. I mean, that's crazy. You can get it out. The whole world could see it in theory if you can, bring them to it somehow.
Yeah, how many people you reach, whether it resonates with people, whether those people recommend it to others, that's all up to chance. Like that's completely out of my hands. But just the fact.
Well, I mean, you can.
I can try. I can push
something-
for it, but
You
I
can
can't.
make something as good as you can. And
I can lead a horse to water, but. That's something
okay,
that you're
EK.
talking about. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You had a thought. Continue.
Oh, just your question earlier that you had in the doc about commercial viability has been interesting because I was expressing some creative frustrations recently to someone who's not in comics, and they were like, "Well, have you considered just making more marketable work?" And I was like, "I don't even know what that looks like. I don't know what people want. I just have to make what I want and hope somebody else does too."
Oh my God, I resonate with that. I mean, and even if I knew, how on earth could I commit to it? This is a huge amount of work, and I'm only able to do it because it's exactly the thing I want to be making.
Yeah, yeah. If I knew that something would sell would be something that I wasn't particularly interested in drawing, I would do a shit job of it.
What's not marketable about your stuff?
That's
Well, I don't know. We don't know.
yeah, we don't know that. Then that's something I've been trying to figure out. I just make the best I can, and hope it resonates with someone. But you never you never know what's gonna hit. You never know what's gonna miss. I don't know if you can hear my
Yeah.
cat fussing at me.
Oh, yes, I did.
Oh, hi, Ben.
No, you never know, but you are making it with extreme commitment, and you are doing all you can to get people to see it, and someday it will be printed in another nice big book, and that'll be exciting.
Yeah. Well, Shot and Chaser is being made, as with TJ and Mall, Shot and Chaser is being made for print. And I'm making it, with restrained color, with print dimensions and everything, all that in mind. So, here's hoping.
You're a professional.
And
I
by the
think
way,
we're probably,
the color work in Third Voice, again, is just your atmospheric use of color and lighting is just stunning.
I really appreciate that. I've dialed back a whole bunch to make it more reliably printable, because I learned all this stuff on my own, and it's there's a lot of things that Photoshop does not automatically tell you about print optimization, but I think it'll look exactly how I want it when it's in print now. So in theory, if it's in print, I don't really have a plan for that yet, but we'll see.
That's actually part of why the limited palette in Shot and Chaser is I also had to learn color theory completely on my own. I was taught the basics in school and did not pay attention, honestly. And just trying to use color in my work has been my use of color has been just a disaster for so long. And I realized, like, if I take this approach with color and I only let myself use this tiny sliver of the palette, it will be restrained enough that it'll stay visually coherent and not be just a muddy mess. So that's sticking with that. The color scheme in Shot and Chaser follows the severe weather radar system, the color coding of the radar system.
Oh my God, that's adorable.
So yeah, it starts off in sepia tones and then like goes from the blues into the greens and then all the way into purple, and then drops from purple into white, or black and white, because in the center of a tornado when there's so much debris that it's just straight up reflecting everything back to the radar, that's why it shows up as white. And then gradually drops back down through the orange into the spectrum, which is where the current pages are. And then I started bringing in the complementary colors to offset that after the storm passed. But yeah, keeping with that scheme forced me to restrain my use of color so that it wouldn't get too disastrous.
That is so cool, having like a sort of a framework or a system for that. Oh, here's something I wanted to ask you about. We probably are going to wrap up shortly, but there's no archive function on the Shot and Chaser website? Am I wrong?
There isn't. I need to build one. I think I built an archive on TJ and Amal, but it just goes chapter by chapter. And the chapters on Shot and Chaser are a lot longer, so that would be a little more difficult. There is an archive function on Comic Fury, and that's automatically built in when you post pages. But yeah, I should consult with a few people and ask like what would be the best type of archive function to build. There's a couple of other functions I want to build into that website too.
I mean, they're beautiful websites. I read a whole bunch of TJ and Amal on the site, and it's such a fucking well-crafted, old-fashioned thing. There's so much on the site. My compliments, I guess.
Yeah, I'd like to build like an extras section, like extra art for Shot and Chaser, and kind of expand the accessibility of like some other things that are there, but they may not be the easiest to find.
Oh, cool.
But yeah,
Well,
there's
it's a process.
a lot less extra material for Shot and Chaser at this point, just for limited time,
Understandably.
and it's newer. But yeah, there's revisions that I would like to make, including the archive function. So thank you for reminding me of that.
No pressure. I just noticed it.
Oh yeah, it's something that's been on my plate to do for a few months.
Okay. This has been lovely, I think.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been great.
I'm so glad. It's really nice to talk to you. I wish you the best with the remainder of this cool comic you're making.
Oh, thank you. I think there's about probably about 60 or 75 pages left, so hopefully wrapping it up sometime in 2025.